Hello everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to Final Fantasy Bestiary. This series is dedicated towards discovering the history and lore behind Final Fantasy's most iconic creatures and characters. This episode, we will be looking at toads. Well, toads, frogs, porgos, whatever it is you want to call them, that's what we're talking about today. Representing the amphibian of the same name from real life, toads are a common occurrence and annoyance in the Final Fantasy universe. While they can vary greatly from game to game, the enemy almost always takes the appearance of some sort of amphibian. While it is common for them to appear on all fours like a regular frog or toad, they occasionally stand on just their two hind legs and often wield powerful magics to use against their opponents. Their affiliation with magic is likely a play on ancient folklores involving witchcraft, as frogs are considered a common ingredient in many spells and potions. Speaking of magic, due to frogs usually being affiliated with the water element, they are usually weak to thunder or ice attacks. The magical effect toads are most commonly affiliated with is the toad status. Also called frog in some games, this status turns whoever is affected by it into an amphibian. This usually inhibits them from casting any spells or using special abilities, while also greatly lowering their combat stats. The only thing that a player can usually do is auto-attack, though in some games the frog status also turns the player into an obedient frog, serving whoever turned them until they are freed. There are usually two ways of outright curing the status, outside of time just causing it to be healed. One of them is to use an item called a Maiden's Kiss, which is an item that plays on the old fairy tale of a princess kissing a frog to break a curse and turning him into a handsome prince. The other way is to hit them with the frog status again, which reverses the effect. Some frogs inflict this status with their basic attacks, while others sing songs that turn everyone listening into a frog. Toads first made their appearance in Final Fantasy II as a basic enemy. While it had several variants, it wasn't yet the Toad we know from today, as its basic attack simply inflicted poison and there was nothing else special about it. These same two types of toads from Final Fantasy II appeared in Final Fantasy III as well, before Final Fantasy IV finally introduced a new type of toad, the Toadiger, which was finally capable of turning enemies into frogs. Bog toads in this game could also be commanded by a bog witch to cast toad on party members, and thus began the common Final Fantasy frustration with the infamous toad status. In the advanced version of Final Fantasy IV, there were also two rarer toads in the Lunar Ruins, the Golden and Platinum toads. The Golden dropped rare items, while the Platinum was a mini-boss required to pass to the next area. Final Fantasy V continued the trend of the toad status, with several variants using Pon's Chorus to inflict the status on the party. This also marks the first game where blue mages could learn the spell, the same one that turned enemies into frogs. There was also a monster in the game called Alchemia who could transform her pet toads into deadly creatures. Final Fantasy VI would forego the use of the toad status on its toad enemies, opting to instead give them a lore ability and a jump. Final Fantasy VII would then continue the frog trend set earlier, though these frogs awkwardly stand on just their hind legs. The only two types of frogs in the game are very weak, but every single physical attack can turn their enemies into frogs, or turn them back to normal if they were already afflicted with the frog status. They also teach the enemy skill Frog Song, which can inflict the frog status plus the sleep status. Final Fantasy VIII would be skipped altogether when it came to frogs, but in Final Fantasy IX, gigantoads are found as standard enemies, though the game has more involvement with frogs overall. The protagonist Quina can actually eat a gigantoad to learn the Frog Drop Blue magic skill. This ability becomes more and more powerful the more frogs Quina catches in Ku's Marsh via a minigame. Final Fantasy X also had no toad status or toad-like enemies, but Final Fantasy XI had two instances of enemies labeled as frogs or toads. First up is the enemy known only as the Doomed. It is a toad-like appearance, and some of them are even called toads. However, they are undead, and it is likely that their bodies are not the bodies of a real toad, but instead several reanimated corpses molded into a living being. Fantastic. The frogs most players were familiar with were the Porogos. Porogos were beastmen that were once regular frogs that lived on the outskirts of Windurst. Feeling bad for the frogs that were trampled in the past, Princess Ariri Samariri cast a spell on them that allowed them to walk on two legs and greatly increase their intelligence. This eventually led to them learning to speak in the Tarutaru language and learn their magical spells. While they simply wished to live in peace alongside the enlightened races of Vana'diel, Windurst eliminated them out of fear that they would use these magics against them. They even eliminated the frogs unaffected by Samariri's spell. The surviving Porogos fled to the east and joined forces with the Mamelja savages, seeking revenge against the Tarutarus. Princess Samariri would eventually pass away, though her soul would be selected by the Valkyries of Odin to live in Valhalla as a member of the elite Einherjar. When players entered any of the second-tier instances of Einherjar, there is a chance they encounter the princess as a Porogo, who makes use of powerful magics and turns people into frogs constantly. Toad enemies came to exist in Final Fantasy XII and XIII, though they no longer possessed the Toad status, likely due to the ridiculous appearance of the debuff on these stronger graphical engines. Final Fantasy XIV also makes use of Gigantoads as a large and powerful enemy, capable of pulling players towards it with its sticky tongue. Porogos have also made an appearance in Final Fantasy XIV in their expansion, Heavensward, appearing outside of Matoya's cave. Their story hasn't been explored much yet, but several of them serve Matoya and are capable of speech, while some simply guard the outskirts of the cave. Now, frogs, toads, whatever, appear in tons of Final Fantasy games outside of the primary ones. Heck, the frog hunting minigame from Final Fantasy IX actually has a cameo in Final Fantasy XV's demo, episode Duske, where 10 frogs can be found to unlock a secret side quest. While the status will likely be restricted to lower graphical mobile Final Fantasy games in the future, it doesn't take away from the sour yet pleasant feeling fans get when they see this status on their characters. Thank you for watching this episode of Final Fantasy Bestiary. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and check out the rest of the Bestiary videos on my channel. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you all in the next video, and until then, take care.